We good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I don't handle the heat very well, but I'll try to get through this. So, first of all, the story that you heard at the beginning. I've gotten a magazine for many, many years called Victoria Magazine. It's sort of just a way to sort of escape through a magazine every once in a while. And they had a call for authors to write a little piece about something about your hometown or family in your hometown. So on a whim one morning, I was in my bathrobe. It was 5 in the morning because I get up early. I just thought, oh, I'm going to write a little something. So I just wrote it down, hit the send button, and then like 2 weeks later, hey, we'd like to publish your piece about your small town life. I didn't think a thing of it. Oh, that was nice. And then I got the letter from Judy saying, did you write this piece? And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody knows I wrote that. Because it was only like an inch long, just a little blurb, you know, they edit it and cut it. But how odd that we would meet that way. It reminds me of another story similar to that. So when I was the only one of the 3 kids in my family who had any interest in family history of any kind. And my first year in college, I was doing a project, I think, and it was about your family tree, and I didn't know a lot. My mother's family didn't know anything because everything was destroyed in Europe in the war. That's what we were told. But my dad's family has been in this area for a very long time, probably 10 generations, I would say. So I was asking questions and writing things down, and I knew they came from York County in Pennsylvania. So I begged or, complained and asked my parents to take me there so I could look at some of the records. So my parents drove me to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania and took me to the Historical Society, to one of those places where you have to wear gloves. You can't touch anything unless you're wearing gloves because of all the documents. And they brought out all of these records, and I found one of my I think 4 greats, their name, Anna Robb was her name. So I thought, oh wow, she was born in 1811, that's pretty far back. And then I looked at the bottom and it said, buried in the Twin Churches Cemetery in New Middletown, Ohio. And I'm like, what? What? She's buried here? Less than a mile from where I live? You're kidding. So that's an odd story about how I found out about her. But anyway, I'm a professor at YSU. I have a PhD in education from Kent State University. I was not a history major, although I debated about that for a long time. But my mind at the time when I was starting college, I thought, I can't major in history because I think it'll be too hard to find a job. I have to do something in healthcare. So my stint as an educator is my second job. I worked in a hospital setting, actually in a dialysis unit for many years in a hospital, before I went back to school to get the PhD. But I have a PhD in education. I have a master's degree in education and secondary curriculum, and I have a bachelor's degree in nutrition. So I worked as a dietitian and with renal patients and kidney patients for many years, taught part-time, and then went back to school. I think I was 39 when I went back to school. So I can be a cheerleader for anybody who wants to go back and further their education when they're older. Because I was juggling a full-time job, 3 kids, 1 in elementary, 1 in middle school, 1 in high school, and then driving to Kent State twice a week for 7 years to finally finish. So this is not an educational talk. It's not an academic talk. I know there are people here who knew Mabel better than I knew her, and I know she has relatives in the room. I think Mabel and I are related like about 6 or 7, maybe 8 generations back. But I know there are people who knew her better than I did, and probably people who speak better than I do or have history degrees who can probably tell you a lot more. This is just a personal tribute to her and what she meant to me as a small town girl who wasn't even sure at the age of 18 if she was even going to go to college. My parents didn't really talk about it much. There was really no expectation for it. My mom was a teenager when I was born. not really talked about, but I think possibly my experiences with Mabel, because I thought she was pretty cool when I was young. I thought my experiences with her probably had a lot to do with why I chose to further my education and why I might be an educator now. So I'm calling this a progressive woman's legacy to a small town girl. This is a little slow, so I'm hoping this works. John, you might have to listen. Okay.
Hey.
I have a few artifacts, so bear with me. I'm just going to read something in honor of Mabel. Because every time I was at Mabel's house, which was many, many times, she would start rattling this off from memory, and I'm ashamed to say I used to have it memorized, but I do not anymore. Anybody familiar with this poem called It Snows? Anybody ever hear Mabel say it? Because every time I visited, she would read a stanza of this poem. Okay, here we go. It snows, cries the schoolboy, hurrah, and his shout is ringing through parlor and hall, while swift as the wing, up the swallow he's out, and his playmates have answered his call. It makes the heart leap to but witness their joy. Proud wealth has no pleasures, I trow, like the rapture that throbs in the pulse of the boy as he gathers his treasures of snow. Then lay not the trappings of gold on thine heirs, while health and the riches of nature are theirs. It snows, sighs the imbecile, and his breath comes heavy as clogged with a weight, while from the pale aspect of nature in death he turns to the blaze at his grate. And nearer his soft cushioned chair is wheeled toward the life-giving flame. He dreads the chill puff of the snow-burdened air, lest it wither his delicate frame. Oh, small is the pleasure existence can give, when the fear we shall die only proves that we live. It snows, cries the traveler, ho! And the word has quickened the steed's lagging pace. The wind rushes by, but its howl is unheard, unfelt by the sharp drift in his face. For bright though the tempest his own home appeared, aye, though leagues intervened he can see. There's a clear glowing hearth and a table prepared, and his wife with her babes at her knee. Blessed thought, how it lightens the grief-laden hour that those we love dearest are safe from its power. It snows, cries the bell, dear how lucky, and turns from her mirror to watch the flakes fall. Like the first rose of summer, her dimpled cheek burns, while musing of sleigh ride and ball. There are visions of conquest, of splendor and mirth, floating over each drear winter's day, but the tintings of hope on the storm-beaten earth will melt like the snowflakes away. Turn me to heaven, fair maiden, for bliss. What world has a pure fount never opened than this? It snows, cries the widow, O God, and her sighs have stifled her voice of her prayer. Its burden you'll read in her tear-swollen eyes, on her cheek sunk with fasting and care. 'Tis night and her fatherless ask her for bread, but he gives the young ravens their food, and she trusts till her dark hearth adds horror to dread as she lays on her last chip of wood. Poor sufferer that sorrow, thy God only knows, 'tis a most bitter lot to be poor when it snows. So this was Mabel's first lesson to me, and my mother drilled it in me too, about how every event is not perceived by every person in the same way, and how to think about the perspectives of other people in the events that happen in life, because everybody's perspective is not your own. So my mother had this framed. When my mother passed away 2 years ago, I found this framed, and she left a copy for each of us kids to have. So I know it was important to her as well. But when I visited Mabel, she frequently would quote a line of that poem. So it was a lesson she was trying to teach, even though we were not in a teaching environment. Okay, so Jeopardy quiz. Does anybody know what other famous poem Sarah Josepha Hale wrote? I always tell my students, I've got a Jeopardy question just in case you're on there. Sarah Josepha Buell Hale also wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. And she was actually an editor for Goethe's ladies magazine for 40 years, and she was still working when she was 89. So very similar to Mabel in that way, right? Not a slacker. She was working till she was almost 90. So this I call Mabel's World. Mabel was born in 1893, and so I thought, what was going on when Mabel was born? What made her the way that she was? Because when I was growing up, she did not exhibit qualities of other women who were in the same age bracket. She was very different, very progressive. I remember once asking her about when she got married, and I think she was around 30 when she got married, and I was asking her, you know, what her parents thought and everything. She goes, I didn't care, I was 30. I was doing what I wanted. I'm paraphrasing. I was like, okay, I like that. Okay. But they called it the mauve decade because, I guess paint, they finally figured out the formula for mauve paint, so they called it the mauve decade. It was also the date for the Chicago World's Fair. There was a great financial crisis in that year as well, but there was an explosion of new products on the market, and women's suffrage was becoming mainstream. So the role of women was changing, and they were getting more into the work world and starting to lead what was considered the traditional life that women had. And really, that's the one societal change that really jumpstarts a lot of the new products that we have. Women getting into the workforce has really done more for changing the products that are out there that we see than any other social factor. So in my file, I brought some things I was going to share about what came about in 1893. So I'm thinking maybe this was one of the reasons Mabel was so progressive. And I know her mom, I've read about her mom, and I think she was a spitfire, from what I've read. So, yeah, Melly, right? Melly Neck? Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot of stories about her, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. But here are some fun facts about 1893. 25 million people visited the Chicago World's Fair. The Durea brothers road tested the first ever American-made gasoline-powered automobile in Springfield, Massachusetts on September 20th, 1893. The rank of Chief Petty Officer was established by the U.S. Navy, and this one really surprised me. The first recorded college basketball game occurred in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, between the Geneva College Covenanters and the New Brighton YMCA. So, what came about in 1893? The Ferris wheel, the automatic dishwasher invented by Josephine Cochran. I'm sure Mabel would have been all about that. Spray paint, the zipper, squashed pennies, Cracker Jacks, Aunt Jemima pancake mix, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, Wrigley's Juicy Fruit gum, that was my dad's favorite, commemorative stamps and coins, and then here are some food products: cream of wheat, shredded wheat, macaroni, and then the famous Heinz pickle pin. So now I have a picture of wood. This was called Meeting Mabel. Now everybody knew who Mabel was, and I'm going to save some time at the end for my presentation because I'd really like, if anybody's here, they could share a story about Mabel, because I'm sure there are a lot of people here who knew Mabel, are related to Mabel, and might have something that the others might be interested to hear. Actually, I've got to spoil it was going to be a surprise. 2 weeks ago, I was on Ancestry, and I connected with Mabel's granddaughter, Linda. And I said, I saw Linda Davis come up on my feed, and I'm like, Linda, are you Mabel's granddaughter? She's like, yeah. And I said, your dad was Baker, right? Yeah. She's like, I said, well, I'm going to talk about your grandma in a couple weeks. I just wanted to let you know, because I think she lives in Portage County. So she said, yeah, I think my sister and I think we'll be able to make it. So I said, I'll save some time at the end of my talk, so if you want to say a few words about your grandma, I'm sure people would much rather hear from you than me. So I don't know. Linda's not here, right? I don't think. So anyway, sort of hoping. So Mabel went to my grandma's church, the Zion Lutheran Church, so I knew of Mabel from that. But the way our family met Mabel was she stopped by at our house one day to buy firewood from my dad. My dad worked at the steel mill. He was laid off a lot. And so all of the times he was laid off, he was doing other things to earn money. You know, we would make apple cider and sell it at the largest flea market. We would cut firewood, and I had to do it too, just like my brother did it. And she came to buy some firewood, so I thought, she's doing a good deed for a neighbor. And during one of those visits, when she came to buy firewood from my mom and dad, she asked my mom if she'd be interested in doing a little job for her. And of course, my mother, always interested in an adventure, and always taught me, you know, don't ever miss an opportunity with old people, Jeanine. They can teach you a lot. So you take advantage of every chance you get. So my mom took her up on the opportunity. So we met over a piece of firewood. Those are sort of out of order because the next thing I want to tell you about is links. So I tried desperately all weekend to find my links book. I could not find it. And I realized my daughter has it, and she lives in Ravenna. So Mabel asked my mother if she would type the links book for her. So my mother did all of the typing for the links book for Mabel. And that's how I spent so much time at Mabel's house, is that my mother would go there, go over the manuscripts with Mabel. You know, they talk about corrections, then she would bring them home and type them up. And so my mother would drag me with her every time she went to Mabel's house, which is how I was fortunate enough to spend so much time there. So I did purchase another copy, so I always have a spare on me, just in case I need to refresh my memory. But yeah, all of that work on links, that was my mother sitting at home with her. I don't even think they had word processors then. It was still the legitimate typewriter. By the way, which my son, who's 26, one day, I remember he was in high school, he saw the word typewriter and said, "What's a typewriter?" I thought, oh gosh, really? Yeah. But Mabel taught me to appreciate the past because of all the things I absorbed while I was there listening to her talk to my mom, and the things that she would quote, like those poems. And one of the things that I learned about was the Indian tree. And I brought a little tree branch with me because I could not remember if there was a picture of it in the links book, because I couldn't find my links book. But Mabel, when I was 13 years old, Mabel marched me, my siblings, and my cousins who were visiting from Oklahoma. She marched us way behind her house to see the Indian tree, is what she called it, the Indian tree. I may not even need the microphone, but she took us back there. This is not a sapling, you know, it had to be a sapling, but I didn't have any saplings at my house. I had a branch. But she took us back there and she said, now, here is what they did. And she said they would take the branches like this, and they would bend them down, and then they would wrap them with this, the deer skin, the deer hide, and tie them so they could grow like this, and that they would point east to west so that they would serve as trail markers for the Indians. So when I looked it up online, I guess they're called trail trees. And does anybody know, is that tree still back there anywhere? Is it?
It fell.
Oh, I've always wondered if it's still there. So I do have a picture. The one picture I found in my mother's things after she passed away of Mabel and my siblings and I and my cousin from Oklahoma posed in front of the Indian tree. And this was taken on July 6th, 1977. So I just brought it along in case anybody wants to see it. So Mabel just enhanced my desire to learn about the past, and that's probably why I made my parents drag me to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, so I could try to find out about my family that was buried back where I live now. Valuing words, obviously, with Mabel quoting poetry all the time, or quoting lessons, talking about things. She was always using everything as a teachable moment. That's probably why when I graduated from high school, this arrived at our front door. I still have it. Mabel bought me this dictionary, collegiate dictionary, for my high school graduation. So I've used it, my kids have all used it, and you can see it's got a lot of miles on it, and I used it a lot in my English classes in college to learn new words. So I'm grateful to her for that. This I call passing the torch. And I talked to my daughter, my youngest daughter, Ari. She has a master's degree in history from YSU, and she actually worked with Virginia Grilly with AmeriCorps, doing a lot of the historical projects in Salem, Ohio, for her graduate project before she finished. And then she also taught history part-time at YSU. And so I like to think that maybe Mabel passed the torch through me, because now I have a child who has a very strong interest in history. And I know that, my generation that's getting older, I'm almost ready to retire. We need to pass the torch to the next generation. How are the children now going to appreciate history and learn from it and learn to value it? So Mabel, she was not only incredible because she was my grandmother's school teacher, and she was still substitute teaching in 1974 when my husband was in 6th grade. So she was probably 81 years old, still substitute teaching. I think that was a rarity. Darla, I don't think she ever subbed when I think she finished by then. She was also a mentor to me, promoting education. I think she was probably the only person that I knew that had a college degree at that time. Nobody in my father's family had a college degree, because most people, if you read, I believe it's Harry Davis's historical record of this area, a lot of the people who migrated to this area, they were not super big on education. It wasn't something that was valued very highly, at least not on my dad's side of the family, not really discussed. So she was like an anomaly, I think, compared to a lot of the people that I knew and that I grew up with and my own family members. So she was definitely a mentor. And, I waffled so much in my senior year of school. I remember my guidance counselor saying, "What are you going to do the rest of your life? Flip hamburgers? You've got the ability to further your education." So I think Mabel had a strong part in that. And she was also a friend. You felt like you could talk to her about anything. She would be very direct with you, tell you her opinion about things. So I would encourage all of us to think, who can I pass the torch to so that they will appreciate history like you all do? So I want to leave some time so that if anybody's here who might have an interesting story about Mabel that I'm sure everybody would like to hear, I would love to hear about it. The takeaways, she always said she liked to interact with young people, because I said, "Mabel, how do you do so well for somebody your age? How is it you're always, you're out mowing your grass when you're in your 90s, you're driving yourself to an airport to go visit Timbuktu or someplace." I know she went a lot of places. And she was doing this well into her old age, and I asked her once when I was young, "Mabel, how have you done this?" And she said, "You always have to stay connected with young people. Interacting with young people is how you stay young." And I've never forgotten that. She's given me an appreciation of history, even though it is not my primary area of focus at work. but I love it. It's sort of my hobby. She taught me to value education. My mom promoted education, even though she did not have a formal education. But there was not a lot of push toward becoming educated in my family. And then she also taught me to appreciate nature, because a lot of what she did, taking people to the Indian tree. When Mabel, right before she passed away, she was writing another book. Did anybody know that? Yeah, Wildflowers of Ohio.
When she passed away, her son took the manuscript. My mother was home cleaning the house and burned it.
Because I was typing it for her. I was working on that book for her.
Yeah, he threw it on the bonfire they had out back. And hardly my mother was here.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I was doing, trying to help her with her Wildflowers of Ohio book, because I was so excited. Oh, I can learn about all these plants that live where I do. But it was never finished. So I did bring some other works by Mabel with me in case anybody wants to see them. I don't know if anybody is aware that these are out there, but I wanted to let you know. In Maud Library at YSU, in Maud Library's collections, there are 3 oral history interviews with Mabel that took place between 1975 and 1979 with a Bernice Mercer, who did the interviewing. And I actually brought copies with me if anybody wanted to see what they look like. But the first one is about traveling in a Model T Ford, where she chronicles her experience with her husband driving out west in the 1920s in a Model T Ford. Makes you appreciate modern conveniences. She also has one oral history interview about teaching and what teaching was like and what it meant to be trained as a teacher and her educational training. Of course, going from Canfield School, which apparently was the only quality high school at the time when she finished. That's what was said in the manuscript. On to Western Reserve University, which is now Case Western Reserve University. Again, never knew anybody at that age that had college training. And then there is also another manuscript about the KKK in Springfield Township and their role. And a lot of people think, what? The KKK? Yeah. She was interviewed about that. And so my mom's family is all from Eastern Europe. And those were the people that were not well accepted here at the time. Anybody who had a different language, an accent, you couldn't understand them, or were Catholic at the time, not well accepted. And so this chronicles this question and answer about what was going on in Springfield Township with that, and that's where she talked a little bit about that. So those are in the Maud Library. You can download them and print them off. I mean, they're not inaccessible, so I just downloaded them and printed them off. And so I have copies I brought today if anybody wants to see what they look like, where you can see the question and answer. And then, of course, the Wildflowers of Ohio, which never was completed. But with that, I'm going to end and see. I know there are relatives out here. I was hoping Linda would make it to be able to talk to all of you. Who has a story about Mabel? Come on. She was funny.
Evelyn, you got a story?
Somebody tell. Somebody come up and tell.
Okay.
Come on.
I am son. My father was the oldest of Mabel's brother Lawrence's children, Kenneth, right? And I am the oldest of the female cousins. Basically, there's one cousin older than I now, Jack, is not around. It's hard to come up with just one story because everything you said is true. From the time we were old enough to speak, we were being taught proper English. The wrong word came out, the wrong tense, we were corrected. But she also taught us how to pull weeds, pluck chickens, handle eggs, run the egg route, make change on the egg route so that we could do this all in our great nieces and nephews because the only grandchildren at the time that were around were in New Jersey. So, you know, there was our house, Doris and Eugene's house, and Carol was in the trailer. Grace, Janet, and Gary lived at the farmhouse with Grandma. And then there was Mabel, so we kind of had that whole stretch of property there, ran wild. But I am after Mabel graduated from college, I am the next one on the family line to get a college education. And I was pushed from a very young age.
By her?
Yes, that I had the abilities, there was no reason not to reach those abilities. And I guess a story that I'll tell.
Could you take the microphone?
Mabel had.
It won't reach that far. Could you move around and get the microphone,
We
please?
don't want to miss this.
All right.
You have to
Mabel had a lot of the family things that had.
hold it close.
Close to your mouth.
Okay, I don't like to use these things. She had a lot of the family heirlooms because she was the daughter. And she had 3 plates that came from Germany on the boat. And her nieces, Doris, Ruth, kind of coveted those plates because there were only 3. There was a platter and 2 plates. Graduation day from Youngstown State University, I got a plate. And I can't say that my aunts were very happy that day. But that was Mabel. I had earned it. You know, I had earned it. It wasn't that she just gave it to me. It was because I had gone off and done what she told me to do. But we hopped that egg route in the middle of winter. And you came home and soaked your feet in the cold water in the bathtub because they were numb. We hopped that egg route in the summer when it was so hot you couldn't breathe. She didn't stop for lunch. She had some kind of sandwich. It might just be green pepper and onions on white bread. Maybe it's peanut butter and jelly. And she also didn't have potty stops. She had a coffee jar. And that's the way she treated us. She taught us true core values. You work hard. You earn what you get. You don't have people give it to you. But we had fun doing it. We really did. We had a lot of fun. You know, she introduced me to what she called green pears. Okay, I'll take a bite of that. Well, it was an avocado, which I had, you know, we're talking back in the 50s. We didn't have avocados in Middletown. Well, to this day, I cannot eat an avocado because she told me it was pear. Plants, I think she knew the name of every plant that grows in the township, and she tried to drill it into our heads. Unique lady. After I graduated, my husband and I moved around quite a bit with jobs, and I was living in Sylacauga, Alabama. She had to be in her mid to late 80s, and I get a phone call from her. Evelyn, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm home, I'm doing nothing. Well, Doris won't let me do. Doris Blower. She says, so I told Doris I'm coming to your house. She drove to Alabama in her 80s because she was mad at her niece to come and complain to her great niece. You know, you couldn't stop her. She wanted to go, she was a member of the American University Women's Group. She wanted to go with them on a trip to Africa, which, there again, she was quite elderly. And some of the relatives here in town thought she was a bit old. Flat up looked at them and she says, it doesn't cost any more to come home to box. So, that was our Aunt Mabel. She was always there if we needed her. She was always there to teach. I had her as a substitute teacher, and you didn't want to be a relative and be in her class because she could smack us. You know, she might get upset with John. But if if I was sitting in that English class and I said something incorrectly, she could take that ruler and whack me in the head, because what's she going to do? I mean, it's Aunt Mabel. If any of you know Richard Heck, Richard is a distant relative. Melly Heck and Richard's grandmother were sisters, so my great-grandmother and his grandmother were sisters, so we're kind of related that way, but Richard was also my neighbor for many, many years. And he tells wonderful stories about Aunt Mabel, how that's where he first learned economics, that's where he learned how to make change. He learned his people skills from working with her and dealing with different people as he worked with her. She went door to door with things in town. She's an extraordinary lady, born before her time, and we all miss her because we can all tell stories. And if anybody else wants to get up here and say a few words. It's my daughter. She's basically not a Yankee. She was born up here but didn't spend much time here, but she even has memories. They're kind of vague because she was young, but she remembers her because you couldn't forget her.
I have a food story. I remember one of the last times I visited her, I went in and she was in bed and she had an Afghan folded down and she was sitting there with a cast iron fry skillet on her lap eating parsnips. I'd never seen a parsnip before. That was my first, I'm like, oh, it's a white carrot. And she was like, that's a parsnip. And then on her counter, and I'll never forget it because it left an impression, it was the first time I ever witnessed pickled pig's feet in a glass jar. And I was like, ooh, I'm not even going to ask what that is. I'm certainly not going to try it.
If you ate at Aunt Mabel's, you did not put anything on your plate that you did not intend to eat, because no matter what it was, you were going to eat it. But yes, she fed me pickled pig feet. But I did develop a taste for turnips and parsnips because you don't find those anywhere. It's just the difference. And she mentioned Melly side. I don't know if any of my cousins are old enough to remember Melly. Like I said, I'm the oldest. But we lived, when I was a small child, in New Middletown, in the second story of Grandma Millie's house. And she didn't like the boys, because my brother Dave was born at the time, and he had to stay upstairs. But I spent many an hour sitting at her chair, flipping the pages in her picture book for her to tell me stories. And yes, she was a bit of a spitfire. As she got older, she moved in with Mabel, and Mabel had, as she went in the front of her house, she had a bedroom in the front corner, and that was Grandma's room. And I sometimes got called upon to come and sit with my great-grandmother because supposedly she was not able to perambulate, she couldn't walk. And so Mabel didn't want to leave her by herself. Mabel would no more be out of the driveway than my grandmother would have me, her great-grandmother would have me in there helping her out of bed. She just didn't want Mabel to know she could walk. So that's kind of how she was. But it's hard to just tell one story about Mabel. Anybody else over
Come
here?
on, there has to be at least one more story.
I have just one quick little comment. I met Mabel while I was teaching in Lisbon in the 1960s. And as you said, she was a no-nonsense person, did not take anything from anyone. And at one of our very first teachers' meetings, she stood up to ask the superintendent a question. What is it, Mrs. Davis? I would like to know your policy on snow days. Well, my policy on snow days is we'll call school when the snow reaches my windowsill. To which Mabel stood up and said, "Sir, is that on the first floor or the second?" That was the way she was.
More papers? I know there's some other people out here that know her the same way I knew her.
Well, I have the deed of the farm.
Hey,
that
Vicki,
I-
please,
Oh, that
please.
makes me nervous.
Come on, Vicki, you can do it.
We're all friends.
Well, I was a Kira, notoriously famous for those tractors in the yard and everything. And I have the deed of the farm that she sold my dad and my mother in 1964. Now, she had a shed or like a
Give her the
structure in
mic.
front of her house.
Give her the mic, please.
That was her farm stand.
She had a farm stand.
Yeah.
And instead of taking both of my sister and me to Pine Street Market, my dad said, well, one of you is gonna go to Mabel's farm stand and spend the day there selling beans and everything. She would come out and check on me periodically to make sure I wasn't just listening to WHOT and Bootsville and staying out of trouble. She taught me about tansy. She taught me how to make potpourri. She introduced me to cucumber and butter sandwiches, which I thought was the greatest. And I still have her recipe for spiced watermelon pickle. And every time she was out there and Ed came trotting across the lawn to talk to her, she would say, "Hello, lover." So I have good memories of being at that fruit stand, even though it wasn't quite as exciting as the Pine Street Market. But she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. And I had great memories of being with her. So that's it.
Anybody else?
Mr. Blower.
If I remember right, Mabel had a 4-year college degree. And my mother always told me she was the first woman to graduate from Western Reserve University with a 4-year educational degree. All the other teachers only went to college for 2 years to get their college degree to teach school.
Was it chemistry?
Her degree was in chemistry.
And she would come down, like Evelyn said, she would come down and grab us to help peddle her eggs and vegetables all down through the south, northeast side of Youngstown. And we were the runners. We ran it up and out. She had an old, I believe it was an old blue station line. And we rode around in that, and it didn't have air conditioning.
We didn't have a radio either.
No radio. And I was probably only 7. I was probably about 7 years old. And my mother would donate my time. And Mabel,
Your mother was Doris.
my mother was Doris' second.
We could make enough money at 25 cents an hour, probably get that right for Aunt Mabel to have fair money. And that was our whole goal, was to get enough money so that we could go to the fair other days besides children's. We didn't have enough money to get paid.
Well, my mother sort of oversaw Mabel in her later years. And as her driving got worse, my mother took her keys away from the car. So we're sitting at our house, which is north of Mabel's house. Here comes Mabel down the road on the tractor. She's going to town. My mother was like, "Oh my God." She jumped up, ran out, and Mabel goes, "Couldn't find my car keys." But Mabel's the first place I was introduced to a toasted cheese sandwich with Swiss cheese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I always had an American cheese sandwich. She put it down there, I'm like, this isn't quite right. But you never knew what you were gonna get to eat at Mabel's.
Yeah.
Whatever she fixed, that's what she put in front of you. And I'm a year younger than John. And I had Mabel as a substitute teacher. And like Evelyn said, she walked into class when I was sitting there, and I didn't know she was gonna be my teacher. She walked in and whacked me on the back of the head, and she says, "If you think you're gonna get away with anything, you better think twice."
are those oral history papers if anybody wants to take a look at them here, flip through them. Anybody else have a funny story? Oh, you have more? Okay, good.
I'm Candy Pitts Morgan. My grandparents were Charlie and Maud Sight, across the street from Mabel. And I would say the values were exactly the same. You didn't waste anything, you worked hard, you were a good person. She took me a couple times to make moss garden down the side farm where the creek was. She liked to make those glass jars with the lids on and do every plant like you said. It's exactly the same. Everything you said. Good woman.
Yeah. This is the last picture I have. This was taken 2 years before she died. My oldest daughter was 2. And so this was our last visit with Mabel in the big hair days. So I really treasure this picture with her because she just has that same happy look on her face, and I don't know. So the one picture I have. Anybody else?